encourage parental alienation syndrome, which is not good. And and he has all that. He insists that the whole world come around to his view. His Gardner's thoughts here about pedophilia. It says, there's no question that our society is excessively punitive with regard to punishments we impose on people who are involved in non-coercive sexual encounters, that being with children. He talks about how sex with children serves a procreative purpose. He says, however, we have to develop much more pity than scorn for the pedophile. He says, our hormones know nothing about the incest taboo, therefore intrafamilial sexual abuse is probably universal. As mentioned, all of us are polymorphous perverse as infants, and there's a bit of pedophilia in every one of us. There's no question that an extremely common reaction to the accused pedophile is, there but for the grace of God go I. And these sorts of pro-pedophile themes are in all of his writings, in all of his self-published works. But the case in New Jersey I had, it was a man who was shaving his daughter's, 6-year-old daughter's legs every time he had her for a visit. He had a paraphilia that involved shaving. And what Gardner proposed, and this is how crazy this guy was, Gardner proposed that both the father and the mother appoint a committee of 3 people to examine the child's legs before the child went to the father. And it was in New Jersey in the wintertime, so she had to wear a skirt, even though she'd freeze, so that the committee could study her legs and rate the amount of hair between 1 and 5, and they had to come to a consensus. And then when she would come back from the father's house, they would reconvene and study the legs again, and then come to a consensus on the amount of hair between 1 and 5. Now I asked him, I said, what was 1? What was 0? He said, no hair. I said, what was 1? He didn't know. Of course, now he wanted this committee to come to some conclusion. And then he wrote a report saying that the father was shaving the child's legs during the visits. Then he called the mother and said she owed him $700. And she said, no, I paid you in full. So he immediately wrote to the judge demanding that the father get custody and that the mother's contact be terminated because she was obviously shaving the child's legs herself to induce parental alienation syndrome. Okay, that's how crazy he was. And it came out in that testimony that he had not had hospital admitting privileges for 25 years as a psychiatrist, that although he was on the adjunct volunteer faculty of Columbia School of Medicine, he had not spoken to the dean of the medical school for 15 years. And he had not been appointed in any court in New Jersey for anything for years, to do anything, yet his nonsense has permeated the family court system. And I'll tell you how bad it is, and this is the only context where something would be allowed to exist in the way this parental alienation syndrome does. I'm going to read you 2 quotes, and you tell me if these are reputable organizations. This is from the report of the American Psychological Association's Presidential Task Force on Violence in the Family. This was published in 1996. Now, I cross-examine these psychiatrists, psychologists every day who, in these domestic violence cases, who belong to the American Psychological Association. They diagnose parental alienation syndrome. They've never seen this book. It says, quote, although there are no data to support the phenomenon called parental alienation syndrome, in which mothers are blamed for interfering with their children's attachment to their father, the term is still used by some evaluators in courts to discount children's fears in hostile and psychologically abusive situations. Okay, that pretty much says it. However, you continue to see it. Here's another quote. Child custody and visitation disputes must be understood in the context of family violence and abuse. Custody and visitation disputes appear to occur more frequently where there's a history of domestic violence. Family courts do not often consider the history of violence between the parents in making custody and visitation decisions. In this context, the nonviolent parent may be at a disadvantage in behavior that would seem reasonable, as a protection from abuse may be misinterpreted as a sign of instability. Psychological evaluators not trained in domestic violence may contribute to this process by ignoring or minimizing the violence and by giving inappropriate pathological labels to women's responses to chronic victimization. Terms such as parental alienation, in quotes, may be used to blame the women for the children's reasonable fear of or anger toward their violent father. Duh, right? You see? Now, what is parental alienation syndrome? It's a very simple Now, I'm going to introduce a concept that will baffle your mind in its complexity. Okay, if I come up to you and I hit you, you probably will not like me and not want to hang out with me. I think that's a fair statement, right? Okay. Now, if you are a Gardnerian, trained in the high science of parental alienation syndrome, and this gentleman tells you that he doesn't like me and doesn't want to hang out with me because I hit him, rather than try and find out if I did hit him by asking her, asking you, if they saw, asking me, would simply conclude that he is suffering from the lawyer-speaker alienation syndrome, and the proper treatment for this would he'd have to come live with me. Okay? Now, that's what it is. That's it in a nutshell. Okay? And that's the nonsense that we see over and over and over again. Now, you would think that a judge would respect the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. If you are a juvenile and family court judges, and there's the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges and the State Justice Institute, you would think, these people might be somebody I might want to listen to. Maybe they have something to say that might be worth listening to. This is from a book put out by the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges in 2004 and then revised in 2006, called Navigating Custody and Visitation Evaluations in Cases with Domestic Violence, a Judge's Guide. This is what it says. And this is so common sense. And the real experts in all this are the moms and the moms' friends. It amazes me how I get involved in these cases, and people who have never been drawn into the psychological arena are experts and understand things that the PhDs and the MDs and the judges just can't